It's been long enough where I personally have been completely desensitized to it, but have you ever really thought about just how goddamn weird it is that the biggest source of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 lore outside the game itself, it's not the art book, it's not Xenoblade X, it's not Xenoblade 1, not even Xenogears or Xenosaga, it's a slip of paper included in every copy of the Siren model kit. So, yeah, that's what this video is going to be about. That information completely shook up our understanding of Xenoblade 2's world, and yet the only time I've ever actually talked about it on this channel in depth was in the news video when a fan translation of it first came out. So, let's go with the benefit of hindsight and also actual scripting and talk about it in detail. This will contain massive spoilers for Xenoblade 2, and I'll throw a Xenoblade 1 on the pile just in case, because I'm going to allude to a few other things of that as well. First off, I'm just going to quickly remind you of the stuff that was actually in the game. We know that the World Tree is actually a space elevator known as the Beanstalk and also Rhadamanthus that was built at some point in the 21st century. There was a laboratory and a habitat of some sort at low orbit on the elevator. That's connected to an orbital ring of some sort that was used in part of Klaus's experiment. The conduit was up there, and the space elevator did keep going past there, and it seems like there might have even been higher stations above it. So, that's big, that's important, but Rhadamanthus was not the only Beanstalk tower that was constructed. There are 3 of these towers, all on different places on the equator of the Earth, and it's stated that they were all connected in low orbit by the orbital ring, which, based on various cutscenes, it seems like it was used exactly as you would expect an orbital ring to be used: a habitat location, research stations, and quick transportation around the world. But also, just based on how the Earth explodes, it seems like the ring was also used as a massive particle accelerator too, which makes sense. If you got a loop that's way bigger than the Earth, I would definitely shoot high energy particles around that. I don't know about you. Anyway though, the first tower, the one that's actually the World Tree and all rest, is called Rhadamanthus, while the other 2 are named Iacchus and Minos. This actually clears up a little bit of weirdness from the game itself. If you remember how in that one flashback cutscene, the first low orbit station is referred to as the first low orbit station Rhadamanthus? Well, it's probably called that because there are low orbit stations on all the Beanstalks, and Rhadamanthus was likely the first of the 3 space elevators to be built since they put the conduit on top of it. So, its low orbit station would be the first one, while Iacchus and Minos, in some combination, are the second and third low orbit stations. And then also, because of how tall space elevators need to be, there are likely medium or high orbit stations on them as well, and it's even slightly implied that maybe even one of the higher stations on Rhadamanthus actually survived all this time. There might even still be people up there who were just completely ignoring anything that went on Earth because I guess they didn't want to get involved in it or anything. Anyway though, as you might have been able to glean from these names, all 3 space elevators have names that are figures from Greek mythology. There is a lot more Greek stuff in this game than I originally anticipated. Now, the big thing, if you think Greek mythological references in Xenoblade 2, the first thing you're going to think of is obviously Aegis. Now, Aegis, I think, is fairly common knowledge, was a dub-ism. The Japanese name for that type of blade better translates to Heaven's Holy Grail, which, in and of itself, makes that one scene in Torna where Malos destroys a cup-shaped artifact known as the Aegis, and then declares himself the Aegis. It makes a lot more sense in Japanese because it was called the Holy Grail, and then he was calling himself the Holy Grail because he destroyed it. Anyway though, there is some other Greek stuff outside of all that that doesn't necessarily make Aegis a better translation, but at least doesn't make it the lone Greek reference in a sea of biblical and Celtic mythology. All 3 of the guys the space elevators were named after are pretty interesting players in the Greek mythological world, even if they're not too big in the modern Percy Jackson-inspired public conscious of Greek mythology. They are all demigods, kings, sons of Zeus. Rhadamanthus and Minos are almost always depicted as brothers. Iacchus is sometimes depicted as a 3rd brother, sometimes he's separate. And yeah, Minos is the guy from the Minotaur story who the creature was named after, so pretty impressive pedigree here. Oh, yeah, putting this in after the fact, Aeacus is also the father of Achilles, so while none of these three guys are ever going to be the main character of a specific myth, they have a lot of connections to a lot of big important things. On top of that though, the one thing that definitively links them together is how they are the judges of the dead working for Hades. So that's kind of a big deal. That is the theming between all three towers, and I guess shows a bit of lack of confidence that the world had in the space elevators if they named them after the judges of the dead. But if we talk about the Odyssey, things get really interesting, because in that epic, the status quo is shaken up a bit. Rhadamanthus, instead of being with Hades, is instead made the right-hand man of Kronos, who is depicted as ruling over, wait for it, Elysium. It makes perfect sense that the Elysium space habitat is on top of the Rhadamanthus beanstalk and not either of the other two. Another very important name to know is Oidos, which is another very Greek-sounding thing and is a Greek term. Now, this is the name of an academic institution from Earth that was responsible for the discovery of the conduit in Africa at the beginning of the 21st century. Originally, it was just a small lab, but after the discovery, they cooperated with the unified government, which in Japanese is given the same name as the coalition government from Xenoblade X, so it's definitely some sort of unified group of national governments working together in some way. But Oidos started working with them and greatly increased in size. The three beanstalks and the orbital ring were actually constructed in order to study the conduit away from the surface of the planet, and eventually over time they evolved into the facilities we see in the game. Also, the Trinity processor and the artifices were made at this time, utilizing the power of the conduit once they realized it was a perpetual motion machine. Most likely, Klaus was a reasonably important member of this organization if he had direct access to the conduit and the title of professor. It's also fairly likely that some of the people in the control room in those cutscenes were also government personnel sent to oversee Oidos. So what does the word mean? Well, it's not a person's name this time. It is the term for a singer or a storyteller or poet or something like that in classical Greece. Now, this is extremely important because it's believed that the original people to pass down the Greek epics through oral tradition were the Oidoi. And, you know, two fairly important epics that everyone knows about today, the Iliad and the Odyssey, things that tie back to Rhadamanthus. Well, there you go. Very fitting set of references. Unfortunately, the space elevators being on the equator refutes my theory of the Rhadamanthus Tower being in Texas, but the US road signs in Moritha do still imply that the US either took over or bought some land on the equator, and that Oidos is an American institution, or that the US is just the most prominent nation in the unified government, and they just changed the road signs around the towers because there's going to be a lot of government personnel there. So, that was a huge amount of interesting information. There are 3 world trees, and what we know as Allrest, aka the setting that all of Xenoblade 2 takes place in, is just revolving around one of them. There is a lot of the world that we don't see or don't know anything about. I've talked about this before. There's probably a lot to the world outside Allrest, and even plenty more titans within Allrest that we never see, but the fact that there are 2 entire other world trees opens up even more possibilities and gives me a few ideas of what the rest of the world outside Allrest could be like. So, for the rest of this video, I'm just going to list a bunch of them. Number 1. Nothing. Maybe Allrest is all there is. There aren't any titans far away enough from Rhadamanthus to not see the world tree. This is definitely the lamest outcome, but it's also very possible. Klaus might not have been able to reach all his stuff like the core crystals as far away from the low orbit station, since he seems stuck on Rhadamanthus, and we don't know how he distributed everything. We do know that even if there's nothing there in terms of life, it would still be open cloud sea. The entire planet is covered in that, but we don't know if his whole seeding the clouds with life got as far as the other side of the world, or if it was only limited to the area right below Rhadamanthus. Number 2. Isolated pockets of society around the other two trees. If Klaus could drop his stuff from anywhere on the ring or from the low orbit stations, then my guess would be, more or less, the same thing that happened with Allrest could easily happen around the other two beanstalks too. Society and life would probably develop in a reasonably similar way with Blades and Titans, but there would not be anywhere near the same amount of mythos around Elysium and an Architect, since they're not directly connected to Klaus or the Conduit, though there would obviously still be importance put around the local beanstalk. Maybe the other two space elevators aren't as overgrown as Radamanthus was, so they can see them for what they are, and that changes how society and religion regards them. The other two worlds would have to be far apart from themselves and Allrest to not be able to reach each other easily, if at all, just so knowledge of the other beanstalks doesn't reach Allrest, which would kind of break Xenoblade 2. Maybe ether doesn't spread far enough for the Titans to survive in between the areas around the trees, so there's no way of getting across the gap if you don't have an artifice, which it very much seems no one does. This is probably the best source for fanfic writing beyond just other Titans and Allrest we never see in game. You could easily play around with certain things Xenoblade 2 takes for granted. Do blades and drivers work differently because they evolve differently in different places? Are the technology levels different? What role do blades have in society? How does combat work? Are blades even evolved to the point where they have weapons? That's actually a thing. It was referenced prior to the game releasing in some dev interview, but the original blades didn't have weapons. That was a thing they evolved over time, so maybe evolution is further behind because of the lack of conduit being there, and blades exist, but they're just called friends or something because they can't fight at all, and that's just how society works. Number 3 I have labeled as, quote, basically just One Piece, unquote, in my notes, but really this could mean any ocean world type setting, and follows up from my less ether, further away from the conduit thing from before. I'm honestly surprised Allrest doesn't already have more aspects from ocean worlds. It's like the fact that the Cloud Sea is white instead of blue keeps people from realizing that Allrest is basically just a bunch of island nations that happen to be close together. If there's less ether around the other trees, then maybe Titans are smaller, leading to an even more archipelago-like world. I am picking on One Piece specifically for a reason, mainly because if the rest of the world is as shonen-themed as Allrest is, it's one of the easiest comparisons you could make. If you want to go even further with it, you could even have a grand line of Titans directly underneath the orbital ring stretching from one of the two trees to the other. And also, pirates. How are they not already a major presence in Allrest? There are tons of smaller Titans they can hide out on. They can have Titan ships. They can use blades very easily. The only piracy we see is Jin stopping a ship once, which isn't for piracy purposes, it's for getting the core crystals on it purposes. And maybe some Merc missions talk about them, I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's weird. Anyway, this type of setting would be extremely interesting to me, especially because it's a type that hasn't been explored yet in Xeno. We've had some desert punk with Xenogears, and there was a continent in that world that is a massive archipelago, but it was never really explored in that context. Xenosaga is almost entirely space opera. Xenoblades 1 and 2 rely more on the theme of living on Titans rather than the world structure itself, and Xenoblade X is one giant landmass. Sky Pirates meets Ocean Punk with Xeno themes is something I really want to see the longer I think about it, so I hope something like this is done at some point, I don't know. Number 4, survivors from the Klaus incident. Maybe some people escaped it and survived by being on one of the other beanstalks or just on the opposite side of the world from the origination of the explosion. Descendants of those people mixing in with normal Xenoblade 2 world stuff would be really interesting. A whole theme of present-day, real technology adapting to the fantasy world of Titans and Blades. What if these people are descended from the Saviorite rebels, who were attacking the low orbit station when Klaus did his thing? There are so many possibilities with that. They could even be a future villain group for a story taking place after the end of Xenoblade 2. Number 5, a pseudo-Xenoblade 1 world. Maybe the Titans don't normally have to live around the beanstalks at all, and the ones from Allrest just rotate around the world tree because they're near it and they want to or something. Somewhere on one of the poles, or just far away enough from the beanstalks and orbital ring where they aren't visible, there could be titans in what their inhabitants think is just an endless cloud sea. There's not too many interesting points I can make about this. It would just be a cute way to have something similar to Xenoblade 1 take place in Xenoblade 2's universe. Zanza and Maneth, in this context, they're the only people who have blades, and that's enough to make them gods. This is just a really low power version of Xenoblade 1. I don't know. Number 6 is something I have labeled as outposts and drifters, but it also could just be a very Western-themed setting. Effectively the Cloud Sea version of a massive, sparsely populated rural area. Smaller titans again, there's nothing that can support anything larger than a medium-sized town, and you'd have small communities drifting around outside the realm of any of the world trees. People having their own small titans they used to travel around like Rex would be very commonplace, and I could see it being a very exploration-heavy setting where you have to set out from your home titan at some point to really explore anything at all because they're all so small. Number 7, completely unspoiled nature. Titans, monsters, and animals living out their life cycle without any human interference. Blades would be awakened exclusively by non-humans, and most likely they wouldn't be very humanoid. Maybe the thing is just only humans showed up around the world trees, or around Radamanthus specifically, and elsewhere, yeah, there's still titans and blades, but they're existing in a fully natural state. So that would also be a pretty interesting thing. Number 8, I only just thought of this, is where did the Napon come from? There's an explanation about Napon lore, like how the Napon became the way they are in the Xenoblade 2 universe, and it's slightly implied that they came from outside Alrest, so even canonically there could be some titans elsewhere where the Napon originated. And lastly, number 9, your ideas. This is very much one of the I want to see your comments type of videos, so leave them. I don't know if I'll look at them all, I don't know if I'll reply, but even without me you can definitely have a very good discussion with other people in the comment section, and if this inspired fan art, tweet it at me and I will probably retweet it. Don't really know much more to say. Thank you for watching as always. Until next time, this is Luxin signing off. I thought I had something else to say, but I unfortunately don't, so goodbye. I hope you have a good day.